Well, hello everyone and welcome to the Experience Lab and this week's virtual Experience Salon. I'm Sonia Rhodes, founder and CEO, and I am joined by our amazing team of Experience Catalysts as we welcome you and share our positive energy and gratitude for everything that you and your teams are doing in this troubling time. The Experience Lab is an incubator of ideas, an accelerator for action, and we have the pleasure of partnering with visionary healthcare systems in the exploration and design of a more human healthcare experience for their team members, their providers, their patients, and guests. We support health systems as they begin to lead, look, live, and love their way to a new future for healthcare, a future we're all designing right now. And today, the Experience Lab is fully dedicated to supporting our partners and the industry in this pandemic experience design. Today, we will be talking about those vital team members, those folks in our healthcare systems who sometimes go unseen or who may feel invisible. And we will shine a new light on how we keep everyone together on this healing journey. So perhaps we begin in reflection with a simple reminder from Helen Keller to help us set our tone for today when she said, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." That is definitely something that will ring true today in the conversation, and it most certainly rings true in our work in healthcare. Our guest experts today are the embodiment of this togetherness, of this seeing and revealing the whole of our organizations. And I am delighted to introduce you to the extraordinary duo from Duke University Medical Center, Drs. Neil Prose and Ray Barfield. These two are shining that beautiful light on key members of our caring teams, our housekeepers, and our support service team members, and the role these vital colleagues play at the heart of our COVID-19 response and at the heart of our healing and caring every day. Neil and Ray are here to engage, inspire, to positively provoke us to think more about the part our housekeepers and support service team members play. And I'm delighted to welcome Neil and Ray. And I think I'm going to turn it to you, Neil.
So it's just an enormous pleasure to be here and speaking with all of you. And our theme today is kind of an elaboration of a film that you may have already had a chance to see, or if not, we'll have a chance to see shortly. And the film is called Keepers of the House, and it began about 2 years ago when Ray and I were having a conversation about hospital housekeepers and the ways in which they provide emotional support for patients and their families in ways that we often don't realize or notice as doctors or nurses or other healthcare providers. And Ray that morning told me the story about a particular housekeeper who he had been speaking with. And the housekeeper at some point was talking about the kind of work he does, emotional work he does with patients, excuse me. And at some point said, "I think of myself not as a housekeeper, but as the keeper of the house." And that became our motto and our theme and the name of our film. And so about a year later, after much kind of fundraising and working with our hospital compliance office and all the things that are involved in making a film in a hospital, we finally had the opportunity to create interviews. And I always laugh about the fact that I had the very good intelligence and fortune to marry a videographer, Rhonda Klevansky, and we also found a wonderful animator named Francesca Talenti, and we got to work. And so as a result, we ended up with approximately 8 interviews with hospital housekeepers. And the interviews talk about the remarkable things that these housekeepers do on a daily basis. And they have to do with things like singing with patients, providing food to families that are unable to afford lunch, for example, providing food to patients from a potluck dinner with the express permission of the nurses, and giving encouragement for patients who need a difficult treatment or heart surgery and helping them kind of get through the process. One of our nurses who is originally from Honduras, or housekeepers, excuse me, originally from Honduras, speaks in the film about the way that she provides informal advice about breastfeeding to the women on the maternity ward in her native language. And so the stories are, to us, just remarkable. And we've expanded to gradually create a curriculum for medical students, nursing students, other healthcare providers, a curriculum on how to think about the film and use it to change the way we interact in the world. And so the film focuses on, the curriculum focuses on a variety of different themes. It talks about particularly the emotional support that housekeepers give to families, as I mentioned before, but also about frequently our failure to provide the encouragement and support that they need on a daily basis, or for us to even notice or be aware of their presence. So the centerpiece of our curriculum is actually a wonderful piece of research done at the University of Michigan by Amy Wisniewski and her colleagues. And it's about being valued and devalued at work. And the conclusion of the entire article is simply this, that the meaning of our work and the worth we feel in doing that work depends on a series of daily interactions with others. So the basis of the research is, in fact, interviews and focus groups with hospital cleaners in a variety of hospital settings. And they tried to then ask the housekeepers simply what activities or actions on the part of the nurses and the doctors make them feel more valued and useful, and which ones actually decrease their sense of value. And so, not surprisingly, the valuing interactions were things like these. One was simply recognizing a cleaner's presence, something no more complicated than saying hello, and if at all possible, greeting the housekeeper by name. Treating the cleaner as a group member, so that if there's a lunch or an event or a poster that features the members of the team, that the cleaner is kind of has an opportunity to be part of that. Making the housekeeper's job easier, that is by kind of bending over to pick something up, or kind of helping them to understand what needs to be done. And then, when possible and necessary, explaining to the cleaner something about the patient, whether it is about who they are or what their situation is, or importantly in this kind of day and age, what the possibility is that they may actually be infected with COVID-19. So unfortunately, in the course of the focus groups and interviews, it became apparent that the instances of being valued or noticed or cared about in the workplace were much less common than those of being devalued, which were by far preponderant. And the devalued actions or activities really created a sense of being denied a sense of worth or substance. And it turned out that the kind of activities that are done by doctors and nurses in particular may have more impact on the housekeeper's sense of self-esteem and daily worth and value than the impact or the feedback they get from their supervisors and other members of the team. And the examples they gave were things like these. First of all, not recognizing a cleaner's presence. And this is something that Ray and I, in the course of our work, realized we've been doing way too often, walking down the hall without even saying hello or noticing the presence of a housekeeper. Some of the cleaners complained about the fact that the nurses or doctors communicated disgust or disdain towards them, or did things to make their job more difficult. And something that arose over and over again was simply a scenario like this, that the housekeeper is trying to push a cart down the hall, and the doctors who are making rounds ignore her or him and don't get out of the way. And day after day, the same housekeeper has to ask the same doctor or group of doctors to move out of the way so she can simply do her job. And then housekeepers complained about the extent to which a nurse may communicate negative information to the cleaner when it's really not justified or warranted. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Ray. I just want to make a couple more comments about what we see as the meaning of all of this during the coronavirus epidemic. And there are two things that have really come to light as we think about how this all works together. The first is simply this, that we don't have a lot of weapons against this virus. What we do have is the meticulous cleaning that's done by housekeepers. And if they weren't doing that, the risk of infection and cross-infection in the hospital would be enormously higher. Secondly, and perhaps equally important, is that we've reached a moment where in the vast majority of US hospitals, visitors are not allowed. That means unless you're giving birth, unless you're in the process of dying, or perhaps if you're a child, the odds are that you're suffering through your illness alone. And if you imagine, or you probably see this in your everyday work, what it means to be admitted to the hospital with a serious, for example, cancer diagnosis, and have to endure the trauma of a life-changing diagnosis, of treatment, of all the discomforts of chemotherapy or radiation without the support of your family, it's terrifying. And so the kind of emotional support that we talk about in our film has become much, much more important in the era of coronavirus. And for that reason, we need more than ever to recognize the value and the importance of housekeepers, and also to afford them the same protective equipment and level of safety that we have for ourselves as other healthcare providers. And the ability to take sick leave if they're ill or need to be quarantined. All the things that are basic things that they're really entitled to. And if they're valued as members of the team, they would be receiving those things every day. So I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Ray, who's going to kind of take it from here.
Thanks, Neil. Most of what I try to do is repeat everything Neil has said and underscore it. That's my job. But over the past several weeks, I've been on inpatient service a good bit, and I'll be back on the inpatient oncology ward next week. And so I've had a lot of time to talk with people, with all sorts of people, including a large number of our housekeepers. In the past, I would have talked with residents, and I would have talked with my oncology colleagues, and I would have talked with nurses. One of the striking things about this entire project that's focusing on the housekeepers in my own life is that I came to an awareness of something that I was completely unaware of. I would, when a patient who had been in the hospital for weeks, sometimes months, when that patient died, it would be difficult for the staff. And so I would convene the staff and we would have a debriefing time. And as this project began to grow, I realized that in 20 years of doing these debriefings, I never once invited the housekeeper. Even though the housekeeper had been in that room many more times than myself. And that brought home to me a question: where else am I missing profoundly important human realities in this cauldron that we call a hospital, where people don't volunteer to be admitted? They're being admitted because they've been hurled into some kind of vulnerability, a sickness, a fragility, something that they didn't ask to happen, but it happened anyway. And it takes them from their life where they have a great deal of control over things to a place where they may even have to think about their own death. And so it's truly a cauldron. And where it's most intensified is in the actual rooms where the patients are. Now, when I walk into the room as a physician, most of the time, everyone is on their best behavior. They know that rounds are happening between, this hour and this hour. And so everyone's ready. They're ready with their questions. They're ready, they're set for the doctor to come in for the 10 minutes that I spend in the room. what I learned from the housekeepers is something that had been hinted to me by nurses when I would leave a room and the nurse would come after me and say, you may think that you've talked about everything that's going on. And I know that's what you were trying to do, but here's a little insight. They didn't actually hear anything that you said and still don't understand what's going on. And thanks to the nurse's perspective, I would go back into a room because I only had the vision of myself as the doctor coming in and saying, well, hey, no questions, great, we're done. I've done my job. At a profound level, we've discovered when the housekeepers come into the room, there is a different kind of honesty to the vulnerability that all of us experience when we're ill or fragile or broken or injured or dying, that they see and that they're mindful of. Some of the stories that I've heard from housekeepers are as tender as any story I've ever heard. And the hospital is a strange place because we take this wide variety of humans, because everyone gets sick, everyone dies, and we bring them into the hospital and we put them into rooms that all look the same. And we take away their clothes and give them a gown, and everyone has a gown, and all the gowns look the same. And one of the ways that we make sure that we don't miss anything is that when the rounding team comes in, we go through systems, and everyone has lungs, and everyone has a heart, and everyone has a liver. We go through each of the systems, and everyone becomes the same. But that's not at all what the inside experiences that patients have. One of the things that patients experience that I had not thought about until I got to know many of the housekeepers is a sense of embarrassment, a sense of vulnerability around just a sense of shame. Why shame? Before I came on this event, I shaved. Like right before, I had to make sure I didn't nick myself so I wouldn't be bleeding, and right? But everyone bleeds if they nick themselves. But for some reason, I would be embarrassed if I was sitting here, bleeding from. Also, if I had like a 5 o'clock shadow, So I cleaned up and as best I can, and tried to get ready to be presentable. But people who are sick have far less capacity to present themselves. That is where the housekeepers come in. They will come in and they clean up the mess. If we have, a 65-year-old executive of some company who's used to running board meetings and so forth, and now has a bladder infection on top of other things and becomes incontinent and can't quite make it to the bathroom and has an accident between his bed and the bathroom. And they call housekeeping. The housekeeper has to come into the room. This may very well be the most intense vulnerability this person has ever experienced. That there's this little puddle on the ground, and that makes no sense in the life of an in-control CEO of some company. No sense. And the housekeeper has to come in and navigate tenderly this kind of human reality. This is what they do all day. And they have to be constantly adjusting to the reality that's in the room. That is a powerful sort of human gift to be offering. And so I wanted to add that to the point that Neil made, which is that the only thing we have standing between us and the spread of this virus, aside from, government, request that we do social distancing and so forth, is what the housekeepers do. So if we actually describe the profundity of that kind of intimate and vulnerable space that they have to navigate and manage responsibly, and that many of them talk about as being central to their experience of their own calling, of their vocation, something that they want to continue to do. And if we add to that what we're learning in this pandemic, which is a deep reminder of the value of their work to the overall mission of the hospital, of healing people and of keeping disease from spreading further, it brings us to a really good point to say, why do so many of our housekeepers feel financially insecure? Why do they have food insecurity? Why do they wonder if they're going to get protective equipment when they see nurses going around with protective equipment, but they're told that they can't have it right now, that they shouldn't be wearing it right now? So their sense of value is, there's a deep sort of discordance between the description of what Neil and I have seen as we've come to know them, the things that they've taught us about what they offer to our culture, a deep discordance between that and sort of their place in the institution and in our society. Now, the last thing that I want to say is that this pandemic has been, if there is a silver lining, the silver lining is that it has slowed everything down in so many of our lives. And when you look at something, in slow motion, instead of it zipping by, you can see much more granular details. As I've slowed down myself and spent time thinking about the kinds of things that Neil and I are exploring with the housekeepers and that they're teaching us, my own attention to small things in the room, in the hospital room, has grown, even in the past few weeks. As people are increasingly isolated, illness is isolating enough. But when you are not even allowed to have your family member there, except in the most dire and extreme circumstances, what your day looks like is you're alone in the room, and you're alone and alone and alone, and you FaceTime for a little bit, then you're alone, then the nurse comes in, then you're alone, then they deliver your food tray and you're alone. And that by itself is difficult enough. But when you're afraid, because you're not in a hotel room alone trying to find something on television, you're in the hospital because you're sick, so you're probably scared. And that has a kind of a powerful magnifying effect on the sense of loneliness. And so as these housekeepers walk into rooms where they themselves are vulnerable, and in North Carolina, we expect next week to begin approaching our peak. And so we're having more and more cases in our hospital. It's gone from quiet to lots of COVID noise. So when the housekeepers walk into the room, they walk in with personal risk, but they also walk in, we have learned, in a powerful way with a sense of calling. And they walk in with a sense of this other person as someone who's not just an obstacle to cleaning. They're not just working around the person. This person is there and they're responding to them. And they're doing it in a systematic and slow way that keeps them in the room longer than I'm usually in the room as the attending physician. And I've become deeply moved by what it is that they do. So I'm looking for ideas about how to be a better advocate for my colleagues in housekeeping And to begin by saying that they're my colleagues, that by itself is a very important step. They are my colleagues. We are partners in caring for the sick and the suffering and the dying. And I'm looking for ways, and still have a lot to learn about how to advocate for them. And I want to advocate specifically for them because they're close into my world now, since they have allowed me into their world. But I also, as a final point, want to sort of underscore how this question about responding to our housekeepers as people who have typically been marginalized in many ways within institutions, and frequently they come from communities that also are marginalized and that don't experience a kind of security about their place of living, their food, their insurance, the future of their job. As we think about this single group, I think that they're going to be a microcosm of some questions that we as a country, and we've learned from this coronavirus as a world, are going to have to ask. You know, where the fragility that we've seen, you know, this morning I opened up the New York Times, you know, 22 million people applying for unemployment. That's in 4 weeks. We went from what looked like a kind of stability, you know, if it's not broken, don't fix it, to 4 weeks later, we see that a virus hits the globe, 22 million people lose their work. I think that our questions about the housekeepers, not just about how to value them and reassess their place among us, and actually begin talking about them as us, so that it's not them and us, we're colleagues. I think that as we do that and think about how to respond to the fragility in their life as they respond to the fragility in these patients' lives in such a beautiful and tender way, that we're going to be touching on some issues that are going to be of deep importance for the rest of our culture, and how we talk about very large issues like the economy, like what we do with gig jobs, like what we do with availability of healthcare, what we do with ideas like a basic income. So anyway, I continue to learn day after day from these wonderful, generous people. And I worry over them. And as I look at them and ask, so let me just try to drill down on all the things that I'm worried about as I watch them. What's happening is that they are showing us the as yet unaddressed places of sometimes extreme vulnerability that even in the wealthiest country on this earth, many people are still experiencing. And so they're doing all sorts of things to raise my sense of attending to justice and to human value and to the beauty of small actions. And I'm very grateful to them. I'll stop there because I really want to sort of hear the questions that people have. And I'm actually going to stop by hitting the mute. I'm going to stop.
Well, I will say thank you for the opportunity to unveil so much of what we all want to and need to see with our amazing colleagues. Both you and Neil help us see so much more. It's interesting as we ask our participants to share thoughts, ahas, questions, insights, what we call a yes and. I also say thank you for asking, giving us some more questions to ponder. How might we better see, better honor, better tap into the true wisdom of these vital support service team members? What unique lens and perspective do they have to our work as a whole and this work in particular? And what more do they need right now in this time of stress and challenge that has, as you said, been magnified in so many ways? So we do invite you to, as a participant group, to think about a few things. Every time we come together in Salon, we like to ensure that we're positively provoking, asking folks to think, to perhaps take some action. Asks that we've been thinking about for all of us out of this are, can we do a better job of taking that moment, that time to recognize the presence of our colleagues in our support service roles, welcome them to the whole, tap that wisdom and insight, notice what they're noticing, because we are not all experts at that. They see what we do not see. Continue to build that empathy. Ask how they're doing. Recognize it must be very scary to move into those places and spaces, and keep them as those members of our team. I am going to see, just to check a little bit here as to the questions that we have for our team. So there's a question here. How are each or both of you currently partnering and checking in with your housekeepers today in a way that's been working well? So you shared a little bit about how you think differently, but what are you doing today that's working well that people could begin to add to their practice?
One of my favorite things to do is simply to stop in the hall and have a conversation. That by itself is that has been the most powerful experience. And it's brought home to me, and I mean, I'm not a bad guy. I really try to be, empathetic and everything like that. But it's brought home to me that for the majority of my career, I just skipped right by, just like they could have been robots or automatons or something. And so stopping in the hall and just having a brief conversation has been amazing. I was having one a couple of days ago with one of the housekeepers up on our oncology floor, and she told me about her dad, who is also a housekeeper, but a housekeeper up in New York City. And obviously, this woman was in her 30s, and her dad is, in his late 50s, early 60s, and she's concerned about him, that he's in the epicenter of the coronavirus, and he's a housekeeper in a hospital, and so he's in a very vulnerable position. And she wanted to say, really protect yourself, stay home if you need to. And he said, no. He said, I'm being careful. I'm being as careful as I can be, but I'm needed there. And so I'm going to keep going to work. And that, she just, sharing that story with me about her dad, that first of all, her dad is in the same work, and that he's expressing a sense of, yes, I'm vulnerable, but I am needed, and I'm going to have to find the courage to walk into the hospital and to do the work. That came out in a conversation. I've had some hilarious conversations as well that just I won't go over here, but they just mean the world to me, and I'll carry them with me forever. But just stopping and making things personal, introducing myself by name, calling them by name as they invite me to do so, saying thank you, and something as simple as, and this is not, it's not rocket science. That's why I wish I had been more awake to it, because you think about going to a grocery store or a fast food restaurant, and you're checking out, and the person is doing their addition of your whatever it is you're buying, and you're getting your money together, and it's a very mechanical kind of exchange. But at one moment, if you just pause and look at them, first of all, they'll be shocked. do I have something on my face? You know, and connect with them. Just look at their eyes. And you realize the difference between the kind of mechanical exchange that we do so often through the day, where it's just sort of going through the motions, and what it is to actually see another human being as a human being. That is so simple, but it's almost like something that could become a spiritual mantra that I think itself is transformative. And that's part of, in this group, you talk about leading and looking and living and loving. And the leading part, you talk about transforming experience. And transforming experience doesn't have to mean running for president or coming up with some Nobel Peace Prize winning, solution to what to do in South Sudan. It can be something like committing yourself to seeing and being seen as humans in the hall. That by itself is a single moment, is just that, a single moment. It means what it means in the moment. But as a cultural shift, we're really seeing each other and responding to each other as people. That can be profound. It can change everything from the boardroom to what's happening in the in the basement of the hospital. So yeah, most of the things are simple. It takes me forever to say simple things, but most of them are simple.
Ray, if I could also, I'm muted. No, can you hear me? If I could also add that I think that this sort of way of being in the world that you just talked about is an extension of the way that we want healthcare providers to treat patients. I think it's part of one package. And I'd like to think of it as cultivating curiosity. That it's just having enough of an interest in what's going on around you, that the people you're interacting with become human beings instead of category patients or category housekeepers. And there's a wonderful article from years ago about curiosity in medicine, in which Faith Fitzgerald says that curiosity transforms strangers into people we can empathize with. It transforms strangers into people we can empathize with. And I think that that's sort of what you're describing when you stop and have that conversation. You're getting past your own stereotypes or my stereotypes about people because they're so powerful, and then finding out things that are surprising and wonderful and make us care. And we don't do that often enough. Maybe now we have a little more time and we can do more of it. But I mentioned about telemedicine. I'll just tell a very quick story from this morning because it's so similar in many respects to what you just described. But I was interacting with the mother of a patient who they had missed a series of appointments, and I was just frustrated and, to be honest, kind of impatient. And I started just to say, instead of getting into kind of blaming or asking, I just said, well, how are you guys doing in this moment? Because it's a hard time. And she said, well, better. And that seemed like a clue. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? She said, well, we were in a terrible car accident and I haven't been able to drive to the hospital for 6 months, and that's why we missed our appointments. I said, wow, I'm sorry to hear that. I said, do you work from home? Or she said, no, I have to take the bus every morning to be a nursing assistant in a retirement facility. And I have to wear PPE all day long. So now I'm not angry anymore. Now I'm like, here's another person, or a person who has so much more adversity than I do. And I think that it's just it's an activity we've learned from the housekeepers that we can bring into so many different parts of our lives if we just kind of take the time to be curious.
Neil and Ray, I'm sure our team at the Experience Lab feel like you are these expert experience designers because you're actually embodying the themes of leading, looking, living, and loving, and the principles that it takes to create experiences, because experiences happen in moments. It is the way those moments are adding up. It's not one big thing, right? It's all the little things. So thank you for actually really just showcasing what that is. We have one more question, and I think we have another minute here to be able to ask this from Jeff. Do you think that the crisis, this is a great question, will result in more healthcare organizations being open to certifying our EVS members, our environmental services, housekeepers, which will help them not only increase their knowledge in their current role, but help them grow in their career and their earning potential? You know, what are your thoughts on the ability to certify or really elevate?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because our hospital is actually, we have the men and women who are kind of run the housekeeping operation have been wonderful allies in the creation of the film and our project, and they're very proud of the people they've certified to become particularly trained in working in this environment. However, and this is, I don't know if this is a but or an and, but it's a something. There are not many hospitals where this is tied to an increase in pay or a promotion or anything. So it's all it's good and well, but one wonders, and it raises those same issues about food insecurity, about, you know, what it means to earn $10, $11, $12 an hour in this moment. You know, all the things that are a worry for us. So yes, it's fantastic that's happening, and I applaud the hospitals because what's happening is the certification is allowing them to do their job more safely as well as better. And what are you going to do to make their lives better in other respects?
I think that's a very provocative question for us to come to a close on. I invite everyone on this Salon call today to share that question across your organizations. It is one that I think we all need to take seriously and take to heart and take action on. I want to thank Neil and Ray so much for sharing your wisdom and brilliance with us, for helping us see the things that we maybe have not seen in the same way before. I would like to just once again thank all of you for everything you're doing, for the ways that you're leading, looking, living, and loving through your organizations. Thank you to Neil and Ray for your wisdom, and we send you all off with our gratitude and love and hope to see you back here again next week.